Good morning, this is the Desert Shaman from the Shaman's Den in the southwest tip of Nevada. Let's talk about militias today, and let's talk about firearms, and let's talk about revolution. Militias originated in England in the 1700s. And where did America come from? What was America born out of? Well, America was born out of England as a group of people that wanted to have their own colonies and their own land, that type of thing. But originally, militia, or the idea of a militia, was originated in England in response to the tyrannical powers of lords and kings and that type of thing, to balance it out, to have a stopgap or a safeguard in place so that the coercive, and that's the key word here, coercion, the coercive powers of governments and kings and that type of thing could not be implemented against the people, to stop the coercion, basically. And coercion was accomplished by one side having weapons and the other side not. Or one side having more weapons and the other side not being able to defend themselves adequately. So the whole concept of the militia came from England. And since we all came from England originally, and when I say we, I don't mean me or any particular, let's say, group of people other than the masses that are here now in America, let's put it that way. Because we got the Native American element as well, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about here. Well, it will in a sense. I'll touch on that later. But basically, what happened was when the Pilgrims came over to America, and eventually they decided they wanted to form their own colonies separate from Britain, the situation arose where they had to form militias or groups of militias to be able to, at a moment's notice, have a bunch of people ready with firearms, basically, to overcome the British Army. That's in simplified terms, all right? So the original militia groups that were formed were for the purpose of fighting, and they were branded as terrorists, okay, by the British Army and the British government immediately labeled anybody in the colonies. They labeled them with the word terrorist because that's what they considered them to be. Groups of people with firearms that were ready to fight for freedom. Freedom fighters, basically, is what you have here. So that was the original concept, and the original concept which was set down in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the right to have a well-organized militia, all came from that concept of wanting to defend against tyranny, or wanting to balance out the power of coercion by groups of people that had guns, firearms, and some didn't. So basically what happened was you had a group of people in America that were militia groups. That was the original militia. Had nothing to do at all with the government, other than the fact that the government basically okayed it, in the Bill of Rights and all that stuff. Later on was ratified to mean that, you know, people should always have the right to be able to stand up against government tyranny and always have the right to have firearms. So, along with this came the other, let's say, legislation or whatever, that there shouldn't really be any standing armies, which was another stopgap to people being overtaken by the government, because if the government had a standing army, and by standing that means there all the time at a, you know, and paid by the government itself, not a militia group, okay, not a militia group. Militia were citizens. Let's get this straight here. The militia were citizens. They weren't part of a standing army. Standing armies were prohibited or frowned upon or looked at as, the minute you got a standing army, you got a problem, because that standing army could be used against its own citizens. So that's an original concept of the militia group. So you fast forward that, now people talk about militia groups today and they don't have a clue as to what they're about, because they confuse it with the National Guard sometimes. Oh, that means that militia groups really are the National Guard and they're okayed by the government, and it's all above board and it's all government controlled. And that's how it should be, because things could get out of hand. Well, that's an entire and complete falsehood and lie, is what it is. Because the original militia groups went on through the 1800s and up into the 1900s, and were always private citizenry type groups. It evolved, it went through all kinds of changes, but there were always groups of citizens in states. Now, when the Civil War came, it all changed the complexion of the what was considered a militia group, but we'll get to that. But before then, militia groups were groups of people in towns that were holding to the original concept of that document called the Constitution, about, you know, the right to bear arms and that type of thing, and always having a stopgap against incursion. Now, when states started forming, they had their own militia groups for the state, okay? And they were the same. They were basically unregulated. There was no interference by government. And these groups were looked upon as groups that would defend that state. And, you know, as states grew across the North American continent, it was few and far between. There weren't a bunch of states at first. And so each state was kind of out in no man's land, which presented certain dangers. They looked at the Native American and the Indians as a danger. They looked at lawlessness in the form of bank robbers, highwaymen, outlaws, cattle rustlers, and maybe other states coming in and making trouble or whatever outside the state. Whatever it was, you could think of a million reasons. Militias that were there to protect that state. And as the states formed throughout the nation, they evolved, unfortunately, through a process of intimidation and coercion. So what was originally a militia group went through all kinds of changes. Sometimes people in cities would form little things like glorified Elks Clubs, let's say. Only had to do with weaponry and maybe maneuvers and having a readiness, okay, to be employed against any kind of perceived threat to that state. Now, fast forward to the Civil War, and that whole complexion of things changed. The whole complexion of a militia started changing, because when the veterans came out of the Civil War, they had kind of a built-in association with government, all right? The Bluecoats were beholden to the federal government. And even on the other side, it just evolved into where these veterans that came out of the Civil War had more of a association with or a mindset, let's say, or a concept about government, okay, in the military, in the government, or the government military. They kind of held on to that concept because of loyalties and that type of thing. But militia groups were still there, and the militia groups weren't controlled by the feds. They were still there. But the way that it became adulterated, okay, and evolved eventually into things like the National Guard, was that these militia groups that formed in these different states, the states were getting help, okay, the minute they became a state and associated with the federal government, they were getting help in certain ways, monetary help, for their infrastructure, railroads, or whatever they needed the money for. They became hooked up with the federal government. So from that point on, even though there wasn't a law that specifically said that militia groups were federal, they became under the control through coercion, okay? And that coercive effect was, we're going to withhold money from you for your infrastructure, or railroads, or whatever, if you don't comply with, let's say, using your troops to go to maybe a foreign war in Mexico or wherever. So they were kind of between a rock and a hard place. And so the original militia groups came under a coercive control by the feds through threats and through extortion. If you don't do this, we'll do this. Or if you do this, we'll give you this. It's all about money. It started becoming more and more about money. And there were a lot of states that weren't down with this, Kentucky being one of them, that most states even, but Kentucky probably was the strongest about, we're not sending our militia anywhere. We're not sending our state militia. Because militias basically were morphed into being state militias instead of just militias for the whole colonies like they were originally. You had state militias, and you had certain people, maybe leaders in high places, that type of thing, that were really into this stuff, maintaining governors, whatever, that were into maintaining a separation from the federal government as far as, hey, we're not going to do that. We're not going to send our National Guard, or what became the National Guard. We're not going to send our militias in there this militia is for us, it's for our borders, it's to protect us. We see that playing out now, in modern day. We see that this kind of coming to a head right now with the border situation we got right now. As to who controls who and that type of thing. So basically what happened is militias got adulterated. If you want to, if you really want to get right down to brass tacks, militias got adulterated, and eventually they evolved into what we know as the National Guard today for the different states. And that National Guard, before a law came into effect that said, these things are hooked up, the National Guard is hooked up with the oversight of the feds. Before that happened, before that law even happened, you had the coercive effect of, well, we're going to hold with money from you for your state, federal money if you don't comply. And then eventually it evolved into what we have today. Now, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I just do this stuff off the top of my head from my historical research, that type of thing. I don't remember every exact detail, but that's basically kind of a rough sketch of how militias were and how they evolved into more state and federal controlled entities. It was just kind of a natural evolution with the growth of and the oversight of the feds, of the federal government, okay? This all boils down to the feds, okay? And so, what happened to militia groups then? Well, some people still have the concept, and even do today, of militia groups in their original form, but there isn't any, not really. I mean, so you got these guys that are, maybe members of the community or gun clubs or leaders, or maybe not even leaders. You got gun clubs, and they might say, they might call themselves the certain militia group, whatever name they use, the gun club name or whatever. We're a militia group, and they go out and play with their guns, and they do their maneuvers. They might go out and shooting ranges, and they might go out in the hills and go through certain types of combat readiness exercises, but basically it's all kind of like a video game. They're just going out there because they want to have fun, and they want to experience what it's like to be at war, or what it's like to be in a military environment with firearms. And they play with their firearms, and they have their laser sights, and they have their different magazine clips, and they have special permits, some of them, for full automatic weapons as opposed to semi-automatic weapons. Full automatic weapons are described by some as like a machine gun. You pull the trigger and it just keeps firing. Where semi-auto is, you got to keep pulling the trigger. And it reloads automatically reloads. So they call that a semi-automatic weapon. Now, these guys go out and they have fun, and they talk games, and they sit around the clubhouse and the bar or whatever, and talk about their newfangled this and that and this firearm, and they have shooting contests and all this stuff. But the intent behind these things is not what it should be if you're going to call yourself a militia. You're going to call yourself a militia in regards to the first militias, which was a defense against the tyrannical overreach of government, your own government. See, that's what the Constitution was about. That's what the Second Amendment was about, really. It was about your own government getting out of control. And that's why there was frowned upon to have any kind of standing army, because that gave your own government this control. It was more conducive to giving them that control. So there's certain militia groups today that, have evolved, or let's say tried to hold on to the original precepts, and have just sprung up out of a need for some people thinking, wow, this is getting out of hand. And so you got groups like the Proud Boys, and you got groups like the Oath Keepers, who try to pretty much hold on to that original concept, except the Proud Boys was more of a just offshoot, spurious, almost like a born out of a need of protest, let's say. Now, the head of that group, after the January 6th farce, was framed and sent to prison and is doing time now. Yeah, I don't even think he was at the January 6th event, and yet they somehow associated him with it. And then Oath Keepers, too. So what did the government do? As soon as they perceived that there was anything like a real militia, citizens' militia, then they perceived that as a threat. Why? Because they knew that the original militias were set up to defend against this coercive effect, with the government having control of firearms, or having more firearms, or trying to take the firearms away from citizens, which is done over and over and over with these anti-gun nut advocates who don't have a fucking clue about freedom or what this really means, what this country was born on. Even in the Old West, you could carry guns everywhere, except in certain towns like Dodge, where it got so out of control that it wasn't about not carrying guns or not being able to own a firearm. It was about checking them at the door, basically, so that the saloons weren't all shot up. Wyatt Earp and others did this. And that was some kind of form of gun control just for that city, to keep the peace there, because there was so much bloodshed, right? So you have that aspect. But it wasn't about, we're going to take your firearms away from you forever and you can't ever. As soon as you get outside city limits, you were good to go again. And that didn't apply to all towns. That was just rare when cattle towns got out of control and shit. They instituted that for a while. So let's talk about, let's talk about what kind of firearms are allowed. Well, anything that would equalize the force of the opposer or the government. If they had a semi-auto or cannon or Gatling gun or whatever, you should have one too. Because how are you going to equalize it without that? But that's no excuse for not fighting and not having a revolution. And here's why. Let's segue into revolution now. Revolution was born in many countries all over the world. There's been many, many revolutions dating back to the beginning of time. What is a revolution? Well, it's exactly what you're revolting against the oppressive tyranny of some kind of government or king or whatever, just like in the old days. Nothing new here, people. And so it's your right, okay, and it's a natural right. It has nothing really, if you really want to get right down to it, I'm talking about the Constitution. But it's a natural law right of self-defense. against anybody that wishes you harm in any way, shape, or form. Harm mentally, physically, spiritually. Suppressing your right as a free individual and trying to take your own power away. This is what it's all about, all right? Revolution is there to, so in certain periods of time, it just got so bad. And the people were so overwhelmed with the criminality, basically, of governments and just treating people like shit, basically, that they decided, it was time to make a move. It was either do or die, that type of thing. Everybody was going to be dead or in prison, or they were going to stand up and fight for their freedom. That's what a revolution is, in case you forgot. And so, what are we faced with today? What are we faced with today? Well, it's gotten completely out of hand as far as any semblance of Constitution or Bill of Rights or the right to have militias or the right to even have a fucking firearm. It's gotten so out of control because people looked the other way or just weren't paying attention, forgot all about the little militia concept, and things got bigger and bigger and bigger, and police departments were established. I think the first, there weren't any police at all till around 1850. And before then, it was just sheriffs and marshals and circuit judges, that type of thing, and maybe some bluecoats at an outpost nearby, the town or village or whatever it was, would be brought in case of a severe problem. But there were no, police departments. But as towns and cities grew, there became police departments, and guys were deputized, and then eventually they were just police officers. Probably originated back in New York somewhere with the beat cop, or Philly, or somewhere like that on the East Coast. Not the Wild West, that's for sure. That didn't come into effect till later. But as it did come into effect with the police departments and this and that, and then you saw people writing more laws and more laws and hundreds of laws, and then it became thousands of laws, and then it became millions of laws, to the point where there's so many laws on the books now, millions and millions of just laws on everything, that if you really looked at it, every citizen in this United States is a lawbreaker, basically. You can't probably even walk down the street without breaking some kind of law, if somebody was watching every move you made. So it's so out of hand now that you got millions of laws on the books, and you got police departments all over the place that have turned into like a standing military. You got the standing military as well. You got the branches of the military. You got the police departments, which are like a military unit, like a standing army. So you got a bunch of standing armies everywhere that weren't supposed to be allowed at all in the original documents of the Constitution and that type of thing. It was a danger. So you can see what I'm saying, like people have dropped the ball with looking the other way and not paying attention and letting things get out of control. Now, some people today will say, well, see, that's exactly why it would just be futile. It would be futile to have militias and try to overcome the standing army and the police departments and all that kind of nonsensical arguments. I'll tell you why it's nonsensical. Have you forgot about guerrilla fighting? If you're going to have a revolution, if you're going to rise up against the government in any situation, in my opinion, guerrilla fighting is the way to go. It's not like lining up like the redcoats did and identifying yourself and being all bravado and trying to just spit in their eye face to face. No, that isn't what it's all about. It's about stealth. It's about being covert. It's about being a guerrilla fighter. That is the best means to overcome some kind of giant power that's out there. And to be frank with you, the military of today's standing army, the Marines and the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and all that good shit ain't that strong. It's been decimated by all things like the LGBTQ and the vax and all that stuff and all the changes and don't ask, don't tell and all that. The military has just been eviscerated. It's nothing like people think it is. It's a pansy-ass units of people. Except for spec ops people like Delta Force and Navy SEALs and that type of thing. And there ain't a whole bunch of them. They're exclusively meant for special missions overseas for the most part. So you got really a bunch. I mean, I saw pictures the other day of pictures of some army guys standing around. And these people are so out of shape just looking at their physical structure. One guy had a pot belly on him, dressed in camis, leaning against a tank or something, and he was giant. He looked like he'd been eating at McDonald's for 20 years. Overweight, obese, probably couldn't get out of his own way. These are the kind of people that you got in the military now. You don't have the cream of the crop in there. It's actually laughable. It's really laughable. So these people that say, well, we could never go up, and then you got Biden. Okay, here's another thing too. Well, they got nuclear weapons. Oh, really? They got airplanes and they got nuclear weapons and they got this and they got that. They're not going to use nukes on militia people in the United States or a revolution in the United States, all right? That's laughable as well. Biden came out one time talking to gun rights groups and said some ridiculous thing like, we got nukes. I think your brain went through a nuclear demolition. So this whole concept of the fact that you can't fight back because it's too overwhelming now, yes, I agree that it got completely out of control. Completely out of control as far as giving your power away to any kind of authority. But you got to take a chapter from the real freedom fighters of this original country, the natives of this land. Now, they had some fighting forces, and I'll focus in specifically on the Apache nation who went through the Apache Wars in Arizona. My brother and sister Apaches, anybody that is native, since I have native blood as well, is a brother and sister. But anyway, the Apache people like Geronimo, the famous warrior Geronimo, whose name was Goyathle, and the people that were under Cochise, and in that whole group of set upon people by the Bluecoats, Cotonnier. There were women warriors, Goyan, Lozin. Goyan was actually Lozin's mentor. These people were supreme guerrilla fighters, and they also had a psychic sense of ability as well. So they weren't only fighters, but they were medicine men and medicine women, and were considered that. War chieftains, that type of thing. Now these people were up against, the standing army of the United States, the Bluecoats, and it took the Bluecoats a long, long, long time to get rid of these people or to put them under subjection. Why? Because they were such supreme fighters. They could look out with just their eyesight and see troops coming before some people could with binoculars. They just knew it. They felt it. They felt the lay of the land change. They felt everything change. They were attuned to their environment. They would bury themselves in the sand when they saw a platoon coming, completely bury themselves in the sand so you wouldn't know anything was there at all, and then rise up like a bat out of hell and just take out a platoon in minutes. That's called guerrilla fighting. Knew how to use every weapon, every which way possible that it could be used. Had their own weapons and advanced weapons for that time, Winchesters, lances, knives, guns, pistols, okay? And they were supreme night fighters. They could fight at night. And no, they didn't have all these taboos that you're fucking talking about, you see in the B-Western movies. They'd attack when they needed to attack. And they were into supreme camouflage as well, and just stealth in general. Just the epitome of what a guerrilla fighter should be. Take a lesson from that, you people. Because when you come out and say, that you couldn't overcome what's going down right now in society with the tyranny we got now, the criminal minds that have completely taken over America, and this is admitted even by ex-colonels, and like Colonel McGregor, for example, who formed Our Country, Our Choice. He's got everything spot on as far as how everything's been eroded and how all kinds of things have been employed to steal this government, right? He's got it covered from A to Z, from, the vax to the borders to the financial structure. He's got it pinned exactly as to what's wrong, but he doesn't offer the right solution, with all due respect to you, Colonel. Because the right solution is not some kind of grassroots trying to affect your local representative to Congress or politics in any way, shape, or form, or it's none of that stuff. That's never going to fucking work. And so you really need to get real with the people about what is going to work. And there's a few people that are getting real. Like Paul Craig Roberts, for example, came out recently and said, man, and he's an old Reaganite in the administration of Reagan, and editor of the Wall Street Journal for a while, I think, and financial economist, and just a great wisdom, full of wisdom and sensibility, and sees things for what they are, just like Gerald Celente, came out and said that this It's gotten to the point now where it's got to be a revolution. I mean, an actual physical, in-your-face, bearing arms revolution. He didn't come out and say it like I just did, but that's what it amounts to. Let's call it like it is. Let's call it like it is. There is no way that you're going to use any kind of political structure. They're all corrupted. Trump, RFK, Bobby Kennedy, excuse me. Well, I guess that's RFK, yeah. Coming on like he covers all the bases, just kind of like McGregor does, but then he caves to the Zionist lobby, the murderous Zionist AIPAC and all that bullshit. So that ain't gonna work. Trump ain't gonna work. Trump came out the other day and said that he was almost a hero for instituting the vax because it saved millions of lives. Really? Really, motherfucker? You dumb shit. Destroyed America. Let's make America great. Under his reign, America became nothing. All businesses and Operation Warp Speed and lockdowns. And are you fucking kidding me? It all came in under his purview. So that I'm just pointing out here, there is no hope with politicians. It's A for anarchy. It's V for vendetta. That's the situation that we've come to in this country right now. Face it. Realize it. Or you're going to end up in some camp somewhere if you aren't already. So, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is revolution is needed. It's nigh. It's something that has to be done. It's a natural progression of historical progression of any group of people or nations of people or masses of people overlorded by a government that is criminal, out of control, has no rules. Talking about laws earlier. Well, the laws don't apply to them, as we can see, obviously. They can make all kinds of millions of laws about extortion and criminality and theft and murder and manslaughter and this and that. And then they make up their own little rules of laws for the nation, yet they break every fucking law that they make. It's good for you, but it's not good for us. This is what they do. This is what they have been doing. And slowly but surely, they're eliminating a large swaths of populations in different countries and in this country through vaxes and stuff like that. Chemtrails, 100 different ways they're eroding the population. They're attacking sovereign citizens. Each citizen is a sovereign, just like a nation would be. There's no laws. There's no rules. Not when you break them, because that nullifies them. That makes them irrelevant. If the leaders break them, then why should the people not break them? This is what is called the coercive effect through weaponry, but see, their weaponry isn't that powerful for a local situation. Look at the Vietnam War. Lost the Vietnam War. Why? To guerrilla fighters. Vietnamese guerrilla fighters. You can't overcome guerrilla fighters. Not if they're unified and led by a strong commander, okay, and a strong source, okay, in that area, wherever it is, then we get back to militia groups, how real militia groups should be formed, not beholden to any kind of government, or even a fucking sheriff for that matter. Some people have been saying, well, under the sheriff's purview. Well, that's true. They are free. So these groups that start, that are bound to sheriffs, and have sheriffs as an authority are much better off, for sure. They're much better off because sheriffs are the only ones that are. I used to be a on the sheriff's search and rescue team in Arizona because I'm a pilot, and I used to be on their team at one time in the sheriff's department, and so I know a lot of stuff about sheriffs, and they're not bad people. They're if there's any saving grace to any kind of government organization, it would be the sheriffs. But even they, you don't even really need sheriffs here. Be your own sheriff, for God's sake. Be your own sheriff. Don't let these people push you around. It's really gotten to the point now where it's just, us or them, or you and them, or however you want to frame it. That's what it's got to. People are so enslaved and so dumbed down that they just go through their routine every day, their rut, and accept everything just the way it is. It's like the boiling frog syndrome. You put a frog in a pot of water that's cool, and then you bring it to a slow boil, and before you know it, the frog's dead. He's boiled to death, just like you're going to be boiled to death. And you already are, you just don't realize it. So at what point do you jump out of the pot of boiling water, grab your fucking firearm or weapon, or just your personal power, and do something? What is wrong with this picture? It's evident in this third-dimensional reality that we live in here, this dream, this illusion. Well, as long as you're having an illusion, let's make it in your favor. Let's not make it in, some kind of fatal illusion here. Let's make it in your favor. This video is well needed, and of course it's only going to be seen by probably 60 viewers or 80 viewers, or wow, man, because of the shadow banning and blocking on channels. And yeah, go ahead and spout off all day long about what you want about revolution, and nobody's going to see you. We'll just keep your subscription rate down and shadow ban you and do all that good shit. So I come on here basically just as a hobby lately, or something to do. I know a few people hear me once in a while. So that's the whole ball of wax right there. That's how where militias came from, where they went to, how they went down the toilet, how they were replaced and adulterated. But the original concept is just basic natural law. Don't harm anyone, and if anybody tries to harm you, you have a right to defend yourself in a deadly fashion, with deadly force. I mean, just look around you and see what you got going on, perpetrated by this government in Gaza and Ukraine, killing millions of innocent people. And the people, I'll bet money that the people around the world are going, well, let's see, people, in Russia or North Korea or even the BRIC states or China or anything, they're all looking around at America. If they're not, I'd be a bit surprised. They're looking at America and going, wait a minute, all this shit's coming from America. All this bullshit about trying to take people's resources, trying to steal, trying to impose their form of government and their rules and their democracy, this is all coming from America. Rotten America that committed genocide on the Native Americans of this land. No wonder they're committing genocide in Gaza and around the world. No wonder. It's because they killed millions of people just taking over this land. You think anything's changed? Think any mindset's changed at all? Think again. People around the world are looking at this country and going, that's the bad apple. And yet the people in this country, the citizens, are the only ones most likely in the world that are allowed to have firearms right now. And so these people must be going, we have our protests in France and shit, the yellow vest fever and all that bullshit, with no guns. Thousands of people getting in the streets. Think of what would happen if they had guns. These countries all had their guns taken away. But they're looking at us and probably going, there could be thousands and millions of people in the street at a moment's notice with guns. Where would the congressmen be then? Where would these criminal fucks that take money be then? Where would the president be? Where would anybody be? Where would Austin or Newland or anything? If you had groups of people by the thousands with guns hunting them down. It's not like they could go hide anywhere. Not really. Not unless they get on a jet and get the fuck out of Dodge. Which is all right too. That's what we want. This is what needs to happen. This isn't about patriotism. It has nothing to do with patriotism. It has to do with freedom. Freedom. That's what it has to do with. So you can talk about militia groups all day long, and you can play your games with your guns, and you can stick them up your ass if you're not using them the right way. Gets old, man. You see all these gun magazines and gun groups and all the... You don't know how lucky you got it. Look at these other countries. You're taking your rights and your freedom so far. Ain't going to be too much longer for it. Ain't going to be there. You better use it while you can. Get your shit together, these people in these gun clubs and little private militia groups or that aren't militia groups that are... Get your shit together. Create a network of other groups and say, look, this is... this could be done, people. Underground movements happen all the time. Look at the huge protests in France with the yellow vests coming out in the millions, hundreds of thousands. It'll probably happen in another country before it happens here. That's what I'm thinking. But you're saying, well, you just said that those countries don't have guns. Well, yes, now they're getting guns. Guess what? Since the Ukraine war, all kinds of black market automatic weapons are popping up everywhere. So it ain't going to be long before these yellow vesters or somebody over in France gets a bunch of guns and equalizes the coercive effect, right? Because that's what's going to happen. I can't tell you in history how many times the Native Americans were outgunned or couldn't get powder for their guns and their firearms and were overwhelmed by the military. They were guerrilla fighters too. The ones on the plains, the Sioux and that, they had their guerrilla fighters. But it's a history repeating itself. It's a history of, and it's just in a different form, just like history is repeating itself in Gaza with the Holocaust being perpetrated by the Holocausters, the ones that were holocausted upon, supposedly. Well, they were, but not in the numbers they're talking about. And look at the Native American numbers. You got, by some estimates, 100 million people that have been set upon, tortured, hurt, killed, smallpoxed, put on reservations. That's what this country was built on. It's rotten to the core. So I come on here and I talk to the citizens of this country about their origins and militia groups in 1776 and the National Guard and how it evolved and all that stuff. I talk about that to give them, and I talk about what actually went on. So I'm not talking about to patriots here. I'm not talking to, I'm just talking to the everyday man and woman and the people on the res. This is all one big reservation now. It's all big, one big reservation. Borders. What if you just wanted to, excuse me, what if you just wanted to leave all of a sudden and go to Mexico? Well, yeah, but you might not get back, or gotta have papers, or to go farther down and all this shit. There's a lot of red tape going down there. Plus, you can't take firearms, so this is a reservation. This is a reservation here. And you're in a position now, just like the original inhabitants of this North American continent, you're in a position now where you're either going to be put on a reservation, tortured, killed, starved, have your food supply cut off for this whole reservation of America. It's happening now, right before your very eyes. Go to the grocery store and see how they're reducing the size of packages and food in them and what that food is made of. Bioengineered products, written on everything. Nabisco. This package contains bioengineered food. I've got off on a tangent here just to show you how bad it's gotten. But this is really about your rights as a free individual. And all of these illusions about militias and all that stuff, and the Second Amendment, and the right to bear arms and all this stuff. This is all in the context of an America that once existed that doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't exist. There is no Constitution, not really. There is no Bill of Rights, not really. There are no rules and there are no laws. That's what this has gotten down to. And even in the military people out there, I'm talking to you, you know this too. You know this too. You know you put your butt on the line in these different countries and get killed and maimed for the corporate beast that runs you. And you become an order follower, no questions asked, and then you get your ass back here and all of a sudden you're a pariah. You can't have guns, you're weird, you're ostracized, you don't get enough health care at the VA, they don't give a shit about you. You're a used robot, individual, manipulated. So yeah, I got sympathy, I do. That's what this country is all about. Death, murder, using people, extorting people, putting taxes on people. I love that movie V for Vendetta. I really do. If you haven't seen that, you should. V for Vendetta. It's about stone revolution and stone anarchy. And anarchy is nothing more than no fucking government, all right? At all. None. No congressmen, no presidents, no cops, none of this bullshit. That's what anarchy is about. So anarchists are not people that just flip out, man, and go crazy in a city and have riots and shit. That's not anarchy. That's so far away from anarchy. Is a well-organized getting rid of the fucking government. That's what anarchy is. And creating small communities again, just like the tribes that originally inhabited this land. So I guess they were anarchists too, because they didn't have any government. They're anarchists. Well, yes, they were. Proud of it too. Anarchists. They take every fucking word that means a good thing and turn it into something that means a bad. Oh, anarchy's bad, man. Anarchy is your freedom, and a lot of people are writing about it lately too. Seeing a lot more of that coming up. Seeing a lot more about secession. Seeing a lot more about anarchy, revolution. It's starting to come to the surface, people. I have a little hope. But this video that I'm making right now is basically like a call to wake up and see it and realize it, okay? Realize that you're in a fucking prison and being squeezed to death, tortured. Be free. Now, if you like this video, I would like you to give it a thumbs up and change the algorithms, you know, that little thing, and you're supposed to change the algorithms and subscribe, because you really won't be subscribing because they'll just filter you out, because I'm telling truth here. But you can donate. I'm doing a little drive today. I want everybody on here that listens to this to go to my spiritofcrazyhorse.com down in the show notes and donate $5. That's not asking too much. $5 is a meal for me. How about that? Support your local elder medicine man or whatever. $5, baby. Ain't that hard. I'd appreciate it. I'll send you a free book. Got such a deal, man. Got such a deal for you. I'll send you a free copy of my award-winning book, Listen to the Wind, Speak from the Heart. If you do that for me. My time is worth something, isn't it? Adios.